Hey guys, tonight we begin a journey into one of history's most haunting and beautiful stories. A story about ambition, curiosity, and fire. A story about a place that tried to gather everything the human mind had ever discovered under one roof, and then lost it all. So before we step into this ancient world together, find a quiet spot, dim the lights, maybe make yourself some tea, because tonight we're traveling back more than 2,000 years to a time when the edge of the known world shimmered beneath the Egyptian sun. So make sure you're subscribed, turn on that notification bell, and join as we open the doors of the greatest library ever built. A time when ships arrived from every corner of the earth, their sails heavy with papyrus scrolls, rare spices, and impossible dreams. This is the story of the Library of Alexandria, the fire in the mind of the ancient world. Picture this. It's dawn over the Mediterranean. The air is cool and smells faintly of salt and honey. A thin mist hangs over the harbor of Alexandria, the largest, busiest port the world had ever seen. You can hear the groan of wooden masts, the shouts of sailors calling to each other in Greek, Phoenician, and Egyptian, the creak of cargo being hauled up from ships that have come from as far as India, Ethiopia, and Gaul. And above it all, gleaming like a pillar of flame, stands the Pharos Lighthouse, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. It's taller than any building for hundreds of miles, a tower of white marble that catches the first light of dawn and throws it across the sea like a mirror to the gods. Every morning, the people of Alexandria would wake to that sight, and they'd say it was as if the city itself was welcoming the sun. Down below, the city stirs. Merchants roll up the shutters of their shops, releasing the smell of incense, olive oil, and ink. Students hurry through the streets carrying wax tablets and styluses. Priests in linen robes make their way toward the great temple of Serapis, whose columns rise so high they seem to scrape the sky. And near the palace district, past the shaded gardens of the royal compound, there stands a complex of buildings so extraordinary that visitors describe it in hushed tones: the Mauseon, the shrine of the Muses. Within its courtyards lies the beating heart of human civilization, the great library of Alexandria. It began with a dream. After the death of Alexander the Great in 323 BCE, his vast empire fractured among his generals. One of them, Ptolemy the First Soter, took Egypt, and with it, the city Alexander himself had founded just a few years earlier. Alexandria was meant to be a bridge between worlds, Greek reason and Egyptian wisdom, east and west, the old and the new. And Ptolemy had an idea. If his city was to be the new capital of civilization, it needed a mind, a place where all the knowledge of the world could live. So he built it. Or rather, he commanded that it be built, a temple to learning so vast that it would make even Athens' academy look like a schoolhouse. The plan was breathtaking in its audacity: to collect every book, every map, every scientific treatise, every poem, every record of human thought that existed. According to later historians like Galen and Strabo, royal agents were sent to every port in the known world with a simple order: if a ship enters the harbor of Alexandria, it must surrender its books. The scrolls would be taken to the library, copied by scribes, and the originals, not the copies, would be kept. It was aggressive, maybe even arrogant, but it worked. Within a century, the library had become the most comprehensive collection of knowledge ever assembled. Imagine walking through its halls. Miles of shelves carved from cedar, holding hundreds of thousands of papyrus scrolls. A faint, sweet smell, that earthy, grassy scent of dried papyrus mixed with the oil used to preserve ink. Scholars moving quietly under high ceilings painted with constellations. Open courtyards filled with sunlight and the hum of conversation. Here, you might hear a mathematician explaining the geometry of the earth, a physician debating the flow of blood, or a poet reciting verses that had never before been written down. It must have felt like standing inside the mind of humanity itself. By the time of Ptolemy II Philadelphus, Alexandria was more than just a city. It was an idea made real. Imagine a population of 500,000 people: Egyptians, Greeks, Jews, Persians, Syrians, Phoenicians, every language under the sun spoken in its streets. Ships came and went constantly, bringing scrolls from Babylon, astronomical charts from the Greek islands, Sanskrit texts from India, and ancient hieroglyphic writings from deep within Egypt. Inside the library, the scholars of the Mausian lived almost like monks. They were given housing, food, and stipends directly from the king. Their only task was to study, write, and debate. One of them, Eratosthenes, measured the circumference of the earth with astonishing accuracy, using nothing more than shadows and math. Another, Erophilus, performed dissections and discovered that the brain, not the heart, was the center of human intelligence. They mapped the stars, cataloged animals, classified plants, and compiled the first known medical textbooks. And presiding over it all was the head librarian, the chief scholar, a position so prestigious that even kings sought his advice. The library wasn't just a place to read. It was a living organism, constantly expanding, adapting, thinking. It was, in a sense, the first great university, a brain that connected the entire ancient world. And yet, even as it shone brighter than any other beacon of knowledge, the seeds of its destruction were already being sown. Because knowledge is power. And wherever there is power, there are politics. The library sat at the crossroads of empires and of egos. Its kings, the Ptolemies, were both patrons of learning and masters of propaganda. They used the library to legitimize their rule, portraying themselves as heirs to the wisdom of both Greece and Egypt. But the more powerful the library became, the more it attracted envy, fear, and suspicion. Priests accused the scholars of impiety. Philosophers from Athens sneered that true wisdom could not be bought. Even within Alexandria, rivalries flared between Greek intellectuals and Egyptian priests, between mathematicians and poets, between knowledge and belief. And then there were the storms of the outside world. Wars, revolts, fires. It would test the library's resilience again and again. Because here's the thing about human achievement. It's always more fragile than we think. A single spark, a single mistake, a single gust of wind, and centuries of work can turn to ash. That's what makes the story of Alexandria so haunting. It's not just the tale of a building or a collection of scrolls. It's the story of how an entire civilization reached for immortality through knowledge, and how that flame slipped through its fingers. As the sun sets over the city, the light from the pharos begins to glow again. A steady flame atop its marble crown, guiding sailors home. From the balcony of the library, you can see it flicker across the waves. Below, the docks shimmer with lanterns, and the voices of merchants fade into the night air. Somewhere inside the library, a scholar dips his pen into ink and writes a line he hopes will outlast him. Maybe it's a poem, maybe a formula, maybe a prayer. He doesn't know that, centuries later, the building around him will be gone, and that people will argue forever about what truly happened. Was it burned by accident during Caesar's civil war? Destroyed by invading armies? Erased by zealots who feared its knowledge? Or did it simply fade, scroll by scroll, as the world turned its attention elsewhere? Tonight, that mystery still glows, faint but unextinguished, like the light of the pharos across the sea. And that's where our story begins. Because the Library of Alexandria didn't just store information. It captured something deeper, the desire to understand. And that desire, once lit, never really dies. In our next chapter, we'll step inside the library itself, past the marble columns, through the courtyards where philosophers debated under the shade of olive trees, and explore what it truly felt like to walk through the brain of the ancient world. Because once you enter, you might never see knowledge the same way again. A warm breeze drifts off the sea. The marble floors are cool underfoot. And somewhere deep inside these halls, humanity is dreaming. The library's entrance stood just beyond the royal quarter, a short walk from the palace gardens. You approach through an avenue of palm trees, their shadows stretching long and thin in the morning light. Ahead you see high marble columns supporting a portico carved with figures of the 9 muses, the daughters of memory, each representing a branch of the arts and sciences. Their faces are serene, their stone eyes looking down on everyone who enters, as if to say, "Be curious, but be humble." You pass under the archway, and suddenly the sounds of the city fade, replaced by the soft murmur of footsteps on marble, the scratch of pens, the quiet rustle of parchment. Light spills through open courtyards where fountains sparkle and vines climb the walls. Everywhere you look, there are scrolls, neatly stored in wooden cubbyholes, labeled in Greek, Egyptian, and Aramaic. The smell is unforgettable, that faint, sweet musk of ancient paper mixed with oil lamps and sea air. It's silent, but not empty. You can feel the hum of minds at work. Inside these halls live some of the greatest thinkers of the ancient world. They are not just visitors, they live here, housed and fed by the king himself. Their only duty is to study, to teach, to write, to debate. A typical morning begins at sunrise. Scholars gather in the peristyle courtyard, discussing everything from medicine to metaphysics. They wear simple linen tunics, some with Greek scroll cases slung over their shoulders. There's Eratosthenes, a mathematician who once measured the earth using nothing more than shadows and geometry. Callimachus, the poet and librarian who cataloged hundreds of thousands of works in a massive index called the Pinnacle, the first library catalog in history. Herophilus, a physician dissecting cadavers to learn the mysteries of the human body. And countless others, astronomers, geographers, linguists, philosophers, each one chasing a different truth, yet all sharing the same dream, to understand everything. They debate under the colonnades, the sea breeze rustling their scrolls. You hear Greek mingling with Egyptian and Hebrew. Arguments rise and fall like music, passionate, sharp, but respectful. The muses would have been proud. The library itself is vast. More a campus than a single building dot, it's part of the greater Mausian complex, which includes lecture halls, observatories, gardens, and living quarters. Some parts resemble temples. Others feel more like modern universities. In the main reading room, sunlight filters through lattice windows, illuminating rows upon rows of scrolls stacked in niches along the walls. Scribes sit cross-legged at low tables, copying texts with brushes and reed pens. Their work is painstaking. Each stroke must be perfect, because a single mistake could change the meaning of an entire text. In one corner, a translator compares a Phoenician scroll with its new Greek version. In another, a mathematician draws circles in sand with a bronze stylus, muttering to himself about the nature of infinity. At the far end, a group of musicians plucks lyres softly, while a philosopher recites a passage from Homer. It's not just a library, it's a symphony of thought. And at its heart stands a small domed room, the Hall of Naps. Here, scrolls are arranged by geography. Greece, Persia, India, Carthage, Nubia, beyond. If you unrolled them, you'd see a world both familiar and strange. Coastlines half-formed, rivers guessed at, oceans imagined. Yet every mark, every line, represents someone's attempt to understand the unknown. You might be wondering, what did these scrolls actually look like? A typical one was about 10 inches high and could stretch over 30 feet when fully unrolled. Made of papyrus, thin sheets of plant fiber pressed and dried, they were surprisingly delicate. Each was kept inside a cylindrical container called a capsa, labeled with a tag bearing the title and author. They weren't organized alphabetically, of course. The ancient librarians used categories. poetry, medicine, astronomy, law, history. According to legend, the library eventually held between 400,000 and 700,000 scrolls, though scholars debate that number. Even if it was half that, it would still make it the largest library of the ancient world by far. It contained works in Greek, Egyptian, Hebrew, Aramaic, Sanskrit, and Latin, sometimes side by side. It held the collected histories of Herodotus, the tragedies of Sophocles, the medical treatises of Hippocrates, the geometry of Euclid, and countless works that no longer exist. Entire civilizations lived on those shelves, and many would never survive beyond them. Let's spend a day inside. The morning begins with quiet reading and note-taking. The air is cool, and the sound of pens scratching is almost hypnotic. By midday, discussions spill into the courtyards, lively debates about the movement of planets or the ethics of kingship. Some scholars lecture to small groups under the shade of fig trees. Others retreat to private chambers filled with models of stars, bones, and instruments. At lunch, they gather in the dining hall, a long open room with mosaics of the muses dancing across the floor. The food is simple: bread, olives, cheese, fruit, wine. The conversations, however, are anything but simple. Did you know, one scholar might say, that there are places where the sun never sets? Another laughs. Impossible. But Eratosthenes raises a hand. Not impossible, only undiscovered. And they would spend the afternoon proving or disproving each other, testing every idea, every observation, until the truth, or something close to it, emerged. Evenings are quiet. Lamps glow softly in the corridors. You can hear the sea lapping against the harbor walls beyond the garden. Inside, a young scribe carefully copies a play by Euripides, a work that, centuries later, will no longer exist anywhere else on Earth. He doesn't know he's preserving a fragment of eternity. He's just doing his job. The library's influence spreads far beyond its walls. From it flows a network of knowledge reaching across continents. Ptolemaic kings send expeditions south into Africa and east into Arabia to gather plants, animals, and texts. Scholars correspond with philosophers in Athens and Antioch, scientists in Babylon, priests in Thebes. For the first time in history, knowledge becomes global, a shared project rather than a local tradition. Ideas travel faster than armies. A new medicine discovered in Egypt might be used in Greece within a year. A new map of the Red Sea might change the course of trade between Asia and Europe. The library becomes what we might call today an information hub, but with one crucial difference. Its scholars believe knowledge has moral weight. To understand the world is to improve it. To study nature is to honor the gods who made it. Learning isn't just power, it's reverence. And that idea, that understanding the universe could bring you closer to the divine, is what makes Alexandria more than a city. It makes it a symbol of what humans are capable of at their best. But even here, surrounded by light, there are shadows. The library's ambition is enormous, maybe too enormous. Scrolls arrive faster than they can be copied, and rival kings begin to withhold their own collections, fearing that Alexandria might become too dominant. Some texts are lost in translation. Others are miscopied or misplaced. There are even whispers that some priests resent the scholars' work, accusing them of hubris, of meddling in divine secrets better left unknown. The head librarian keeps meticulous order, but the cracks are beginning to show. The library depends entirely on royal funding, and kings are fickle. What happens when one decides that gold is better spent on war than wisdom? Or when religion turns against reason? For now, the scholars ignore these thoughts. The lamps are still burning. The debates still echo. The scrolls still whisper when unrolled. But deep down, a few can sense it. The knowledge that everything built by humans, no matter how grand, eventually meets its twilight. Let's take one last walk through the library before we leave tonight. The halls are quiet now, The air smells of ink, smoke, and jasmine from the gardens outside. The scholars have retired to their quarters, and only a few scribes remain, finishing their work under the soft flicker of oil lamps. You step into the courtyard. The marble glows faintly under the moonlight. In the distance, the Pharos lighthouse sends its beam across the dark sea, steady, eternal, like a watchful eye. You pause for a moment and listen. Somewhere, the waves crash against the harbor walls. Somewhere, a poet recites lines that will be forgotten for 2,000 years. And in that silence, you feel something strange. A sense that you are standing inside not just a building, but a heartbeat. The heartbeat of civilization itself. Next time, we'll meet the people who kept that heartbeat alive. The dreamers, mathematicians, poets, and explorers who called the library home, and whose ideas still shape our world today. Because the story of the Library of Alexandria isn't just about the place. It's about the minds that made it extraordinary. Picture this. The year is around 250 BC. The city of Alexandria, jewel of the Mediterranean. Ships glide into its harbor under the blazing Egyptian sun, their sails flashing white against the sapphire water. Looming above everything, like a promise to the world, stands the lighthouse of Pharos, one of the 7 wonders of the ancient world. Its fire burns day and night, guiding traders, philosophers, explorers, and dreamers. But the lighthouse isn't the only beacon here. A few streets inland, beyond marble colonnades and perfumed gardens, rises another kind of light, the Library of Alexandria. And this one doesn't burn oil. It burns ideas. This was the heart of the ancient world's greatest intellectual experiment, a place built on the audacious belief that all knowledge from all cultures could be gathered, studied, and understood under one roof. Tonight, we'll walk its marble halls. We'll meet the scholars who dreamed of deciphering the cosmos. We'll uncover the mystery of how this magnificent place was lost and why the truth about its destruction is more complicated and more haunting than the legend of a single fire. Imagine arriving by sea. The first thing you notice about Alexandria isn't the sound, though the city hums like a living organism, but the smell. Salt air, cedar from ships, the faint scent of papyrus drying in the sun. You dock at the great harbor, where crews from every corner of the known world are unloading goods. Ivory from Africa, glass from Sidon, spices from Arabia, scrolls from Athens. Especially scrolls, because here, every ship that enters Alexandria's port is subject to a remarkable law. The harbor magistrates board your vessel and ask a single question. Do you carry any books? If you do, they're taken. Not stolen, exactly, but borrowed. The librarians will copy them onto papyrus and return the duplicates, keeping the originals in the library's vaults. This right here is the brilliance and arrogance of Alexandria. It didn't just want to read the world's knowledge. It wanted to own it. Founded by Alexander the Great, but built up by his successor Ptolemy I, Alexandria was unlike any city before it. Its streets ran in perfect grids, its walls gleamed with marble, and its harbor bustled with scholars as much as with merchants. At the heart of it all stood the Mouseion, literally the Temple of the Muses. Think of it as the world's first university. Scholars lived there, studied there, ate together, debated endlessly, and sometimes changed the world. There was Euclid, the father of geometry, who wrote his Elements here, a book so influential it would shape mathematics for 2 millennia. There was Eratosthenes, the man who measured the circumference of the earth using nothing but a stick, a well, and his mind. There was Herophilus, the first anatomist to study the human nervous system, centuries before such studies were allowed again. And of course, there was Callimachus, the great librarian, who organized the collection into a vast catalog called the Pinnacle, the ancestor of every library catalog on Earth. The Mouseion wasn't just a building. It was a living brain, fed by ships, sustained by curiosity, and animated by thousands of minds that believed knowledge itself was divine. But knowledge, like fire, can both illuminate and destroy, and the story of Alexandria would become one of both. Close your eyes for a moment and listen. The harbor noise fades, the creak of ships, the shouting of sailors, the clang of bronze, and a hush falls over you. You step beneath an archway shaded by palm trees. The air cools, the light softens out ahead. Marble steps rise toward a colonnaded facade where carved stone letters spell a single word. Mu Omicron Upsilon, Sigma Epsilon Omicron Nu, Musion. The Temple of the Muses. You have just entered the beating heart of the ancient world. Inside, the world seems to widen. Sunlight filters down through latticed skylights, catching the dust motes drifting through the air. Not ordinary dust, but fragments of papyrus, tiny echoes of knowledge floating free. The smell here is unforgettable. Ink, parchment, resin from the cedar chests that protect the scrolls. And beneath it all, that faint metallic tang of the sea, because Alexandria never lets you forget you're living at the edge of two worlds, the desert and the deep. Rows upon rows of shelves stretch into shadow. Each is stacked with papyrus scrolls, wrapped in linen and sealed with clay tags. Every roll holds a piece of civilization, a tragedy from Athens, a treatise from Babylon, hymns from Thebes, astronomical tables from Persia, geometry from Syracuse. The scholars of Alexandria have one purpose: to gather every written word the human race has ever produced, to map the entire mind of humankind. There are thousands of scrolls here already, but the work never stops. Every week new ships arrive with cargoes of texts seized or borrowed from traders. Government agents, working on behalf of the Ptolemies, scour markets across the Mediterranean for books. Legend says that Ptolemy III even borrowed the official copies of plays from the great Library of Athens, paid the deposit, made copies, and then kept the originals. The Athenians never saw them again. To the rulers of Egypt, knowledge was wealth. But to the scholars who lived here, it was something greater, almost sacred. You wander deeper into the complex. Around a courtyard shaded by fig trees, scholars in linen robes sit reading aloud to each other, their voices rising and falling in Greek, Egyptian, Aramaic, Sanskrit. One man debates the nature of infinity. Another is calculating the movement of Mars on a wax tablet. Nearby, a young student is copying down a verse from Homer, his reed pen scratching against the papyrus with that dry, steady whisper that sounds like thought itself. Lunch is served communally. Not bread and olives eaten in silence, but a constant discussion. Arguments over Aristotle, laughter about the new theories from Rhodes, gossip about the next royal patronage. They drink watered wine and eat figs while they debate whether numbers or atoms form the true structure of reality. And the beauty of it all? They're not just studying Greek texts. Alexandria's library was perhaps the first great multicultural institution. There were rooms devoted to the translation of Egyptian hieroglyphs, Persian records, Indian fables, even early Hebrew scripture. The Septuagint, the first Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible, was created here by 72 scholars working under royal commission. Imagine that, a place where the spiritual, the scientific, and the poetic all shared the same roof, where a scholar might spend the morning studying medicine, the afternoon writing poetry, and the evening calculating the circumference of the earth. One contemporary traveler wrote that the Mausian felt like standing inside the mind of a god. Every corridor another thought, every scroll another memory. And yet, for all its glory, the library was fragile. Papyrus burns easily. It crumbles with moisture. It decays in sunlight. So the librarians developed rituals of preservation. Scrolls were stored in cedar-lined vaults, cataloged by subject: mathematics, medicine, music, history, natural science. Each was wrapped in linen soaked in oil to protect it from insects. The main halls were constantly swept and fumigated with myrrh. But perhaps the most important thing preserved here wasn't the scrolls. It was the habit of curiosity itself. Among the scholars walking these halls is a man named Eratosthenes, mathematician, poet, geographer, and, in a way, dreamer. He stands by the reflecting pool one afternoon, staring at the sun's reflection. From here, he will devise a method to measure the circumference of the Earth with astonishing accuracy, using the angle of sunlight in two cities and the distance between them. Just a few rooms away, Aristophanes, the anatomist, is dissecting the human body, an act considered taboo almost everywhere else. His discoveries about the nervous system will not be matched for nearly 1,800 years. And nearby, Euclid is putting the finishing touches on the elements, a work so powerful that every schoolchild from Caesar to Einstein will study it. His geometric logic is so elegant that it becomes a language of reason itself. At night, when the oil lamps are lit and the harbor breeze drifts through the columns, the scholars walk along the terrace overlooking the sea. They speak softly about eternity, about whether the stars are gods or distant suns. They speak about the limits of human understanding and whether the library could ever truly contain everything. And perhaps they sense, in the flickering of the lamps, in the silence between the waves, how easily that dream could vanish. Because while the scholars chase immortality, the world outside these walls is still ruled by politics, by kings and armies, by the unpredictable moods of men. For now, Alexandria is safe, protected by the wealth of the Ptolemies, fed by the Nile, and envied by every city of the Mediterranean. But history has a way of envying brilliance, and sooner or later, every fire finds its fuel. It's easy to forget that Alexandria, for all its light, was a city built on sand. Not just the literal sands of Egypt, but the shifting sands of politics and empire. Knowledge might have been its soul, but power, raw, glittering power, was its heartbeat. By the time the library reached its peak, the Ptolemies, descendants of one of Alexander's generals, ruled Egypt like philosopher kings. But theirs was an uneasy throne. They were Macedonian Greeks ruling over an ancient Egyptian people. The grandeur of the Mausoleum and the marble temples was matched by the tension simmering beneath the surface. In the royal palace, overlooking the harbor, intrigue moved like smoke. Brothers plotted against brothers, queens schemed against their own sons, and every courtier dreamed of a crown. Even within the library, politics was never far away. The chief librarian was not merely a scholar. He was a royal appointee, navigating the delicate balance between truth and loyalty. For decades, the scholars of Alexandria had believed they were beyond all that. They saw themselves as citizens of the mind, serving something higher than kings. But power does not like to be ignored. The first signs of danger came quietly. Around 145 BC, royal funding began to waver. Civil unrest rippled through the city. Dock workers rioted over taxes. Egyptian priests resented the Greek elite. Scholars began to notice that the palace guards now stood near the entrance to the Mausoleum. The debates grew softer. Some of the older thinkers, weary of politics, retired to smaller centers of learning in Rhodes or Pergamon. Ah, Pergamon, Alexandria's great rival. When Ptolemy V tried to block the export of papyrus to stop Pergamon from building its own library, the scholars there simply invented something new: parchment. Sturdy, durable, made of treated animal skin. Ironically, the Ptolemies' attempt to hoard knowledge had created the very medium that would preserve it elsewhere. But the storm was still gathering. By the 1st century BC, Egypt had become a chess piece in a much larger game, the struggle for control of the Mediterranean between Rome and its rivals. The city that once embodied learning now stood at the crossroads of empire. And then, one man's ambition lit the fuse. It was 48 B.C. Julius Caesar, in the middle of his civil war with Pompey, arrived in Alexandria pursuing his enemy. He expected submission. Instead, he found chaos. Egypt was divided between two young monarchs, the teenage king Ptolemy XIII and his sister Cleopatra VII. Their rivalry had plunged the palace into civil war, and Caesar, ever the opportunist, decided to play kingmaker. He sided with Cleopatra. Fighting broke out in the streets. The royal navy filled the harbor, and soon the greatest city in the world became a battlefield. Caesar's troops, trapped and outnumbered, set fire to the ships in the harbor to block the Egyptian fleet. The flames spread, carried by the dry Mediterranean wind, leaping from mast to mast, and from wharf to warehouse, and finally to the lower quarters of the city, where scrolls were stored awaiting cataloging. Ancient sources differ on what happened next. Some, like Plutarch, claimed the fire spread to the library itself, consuming hundreds of thousands of scrolls. Others suggest only the dockside storehouses burned. But either way, a terrible truth settled over Alexandria. Knowledge, for all its glory, burns as easily as wood. Imagine the scene. The night sky glows red, the harbor roaring like a furnace. Papyrus scrolls, some containing words no longer spoken anywhere on earth, curl and blacken in the heat. A wind lifts ashes into the dark, carrying fragments of wisdom across the sea. A single spark, born of politics and war, has undone centuries of thought. And yet, and this is crucial, the library did not die that night. It limped on, because knowledge, like fire, can spread as well as destroy. In the aftermath, when the smoke cleared, scholars returned. The main halls of the Mausoleum may have been damaged, but new scrolls were brought in. The Ptolemies, desperate to restore their prestige, built a daughter library in the Serapeum, a temple complex dedicated to the god Serapis, half Greek, half Egyptian, symbol of unity. There, among soaring columns and incense smoke, a smaller version of the great library rose again. The scholars gathered what they could, copying works from private collections, acquiring scrolls from Athens and Antioch, rebuilding from memory. For a moment, hope flickered. Cleopatra herself became a patron of learning, surrounding herself with philosophers and physicians. She reportedly gifted Caesar's heir, Mark Antony, 200,000 scrolls for the library's restoration, though some historians suspect this was more romance than fact. Still, the dream endured. The lamps were lit again, the scribes set to work, and once more the scholars of Alexandria whispered their theories into the night. But something had changed. The city that had once looked outward, to the horizon, to the stars, was now looking over its shoulder. Rome's shadow grew longer every year. The Mausoleum had been founded in a time of optimism, when knowledge seemed infinite and safe. But now, the scholars lived in a world where politics could burn their life's work in an instant. The fire of curiosity, once pure, had been scorched by the fire of power. And in that uneasy light, Alexandria entered its final centuries. The smoke from Caesar's fire had long since cleared, but something invisible lingered in Alexandria's air, a kind of hesitation. The city rebuilt itself, yes, but it was never quite the same. The grand marble facades gleamed once more. Ships again filled the harbor. Scholars returned to debate beneath the colonnades, yet a quiet unease threaded through it all. By the 1st century A.D., Rome ruled Egypt. The proud Ptolemies were gone, and the emperors in distant Italy now claimed Alexandria as their own jewel, a glittering, dangerous one. Rome admired Alexandria's wealth, its grain, its strategic harbor, but it did not entirely trust the city's intellect. It was said that the emperors feared the Alexandrians' tongues as much as they admired their brains. This was a place that questioned everything, and to those in power, questions can be more dangerous than swords. The Mausoleum still stood, though smaller now, its ranks of scholars diminished. The daughter library at the Serapeum continued to preserve and copy texts. Within its walls, philosophers debated Stoicism, astronomy, medicine. They still whispered of Aristotle and Euclid, of Eratosthenes and Archimedes. But outside those walls, the world had begun to turn toward other gods. Somewhere around the middle of the 3rd century, the air in Alexandria began to thicken again, not with smoke, but with faith. Christianity had taken root in the city's poorer quarters, spreading among sailors, tradesmen, and slaves. To the Roman governors, this was a threat. To the scholars of the Mosean, it was something stranger. A shift in the very way humanity thought about knowledge itself. For centuries, the scholars of Alexandria had believed in understanding through observation, through reason, geometry, experimentation. The universe was a puzzle that could be solved. But the new faith offered a different vision, one of divine mystery, of revelation rather than inquiry. For those who felt weary of endless questions, this was intoxicating. As the years passed, tension grew. Pagan philosophers accused the Christians of destroying statues and burning temples. The Christians accused the scholars of worshiping false gods. The city, once the beacon of the rational mind, became a battlefield of belief. And yet, amid all this, the library, whatever remained of it, endured like an ember in the ashes. It had survived war, politics, even fire. Surely, it could survive this too, or so they hoped. By the year 391 AD, the Roman Empire had changed. Christianity was no longer a fringe movement. It was now the state religion, backed by imperial power. The old gods were fading fast, their temples stripped of offerings, their priests scattered. In Alexandria, one last stronghold of the ancient world still stood, the Temple of Serapis, home to the daughter library. Its high walls of limestone gleamed under the Egyptian sun. Within, priests still chanted hymns to a god half-man, half-bull, half-divine idea, the fusion of Greek and Egyptian faiths. And inside those temple chambers, thousands of scrolls, texts on medicine, astronomy, geometry, and history, were still guarded as sacred relics of the intellect. But outside, a new crowd had gathered. They called themselves the followers of Christ. The order came from Emperor Theodosius himself. All pagan temples were to be closed. The governor of Egypt, enforcing imperial law, commanded the temple priests to surrender. The philosophers refused. The Serapeum became a fortress. For days, fighting raged through the streets. Philosophers and pagan priests barricaded inside, Christians and soldiers outside. When the final breach came, it was brutal. Statues of the old gods were dragged into the square and smashed. The temple itself was stripped of gold and marble. And somewhere in that destruction, in the chaos of hammers and fire, the last remnants of the Library of Alexandria may have perished. We can't say for sure. No one can. But ancient witnesses speak of scrolls torn apart, papyrus used as kindling, libraries emptied. The flame that began in Caesar's war now flickered for the last time. The philosopher Olympos, writing later, said it felt like a light had gone out of the world. He wasn't wrong. The Serapeum had stood not only as a temple, but as a symbol, a bridge between old knowledge and new faith. When it fell, that bridge crumbled too. The age of free inquiry, of open debate, of fearless curiosity. It ended not in a single explosion, but in a slow, suffocating silence. But here's the miracle. Even in ruin, the Library of Alexandria never truly died. It lived on in fragments, scattered, translated, carried away by refugees and wanderers. Some texts found sanctuary in Byzantium, preserved by monks who copied them in secret. Others traveled east into Baghdad, where the Islamic Golden Age would one day rekindle the flame of philosophy and science. And still others lay buried beneath the sands of Egypt, waiting for archaeologists 2,000 years later to unearth whispers of that vanished mind. The truth is, knowledge doesn't burn. Not really. It transforms. It travels. It hides. But it endures. For every scroll that turned to ash, the ideas survived in memory, in teaching, in translation. The mind of the ancient world was wounded, yes, but not destroyed. And sometimes, when the night is still and the sea is calm, you can almost imagine the scholars of Alexandria walking again beneath the colonnades, voices murmuring in the wind, papyrus rustling like dry leaves, a ghostly conversation that never quite ended. The Library of Alexandria is gone. Its marble halls are dust. Its scrolls are ash. Its lamps are cold. And yet, it is everywhere. Because ideas, unlike paper or stone, refuse to die. Think about it. Centuries after the fires, travelers, monks, and scholars carried fragments of the library's knowledge across deserts, mountains, and seas. They hid texts in monasteries, in secret chambers, in caves. They copied them in dim candlelight, line by line, sometimes translating them into new languages, preserving them for generations who could not even imagine the original grandeur of Alexandria. In Baghdad, in the House of Wisdom centuries later, Arab scholars studied Euclid, Ptolemy, and Archimedes, texts that may have passed through Alexandria first. They expanded upon it, adding algebra, optics, astronomy. The ancient flame flickered in new hands. In the monasteries of Europe, monks with ink-stained fingers meticulously copied Greek manuscripts, keeping alive a knowledge that had seemed lost forever. By the time the Renaissance dawned, thinkers like Copernicus, Galileo, and Kepler were drawing upon echoes of what had been gathered in that Egyptian city, the light of the ancient world, shining through centuries of shadow. The library's destruction was terrible, yes, but it was not final. Knowledge, once awakened, finds a way to survive. Fast forward to today. Open your laptop, scroll through Wikipedia, pull up an academic article, watch a documentary on ancient Egypt. You are, in a way, walking the halls of Alexandria yourself. The internet is our Mauseon, a place where information flows freely, where curiosity is endless, where we build upon the ideas of those who came before. And just like the scholars of Alexandria, we face our own dangers. Fires of another kind threaten our knowledge. Misinformation, censorship, neglect. The fragility of human memory remains. The lesson is clear. We are custodians of our civilization's mind. We choose what survives. The Library of Alexandria was not just a building. It was a testament to the audacity of human curiosity. It was proof that for a brief moment, a city dared to gather the entirety of human thought under one roof, to believe that the mind could capture the universe. And even in its absence, that ambition inspires us still. If you visit modern Alexandria today, you can walk through the ruins of the Serapeum. The sun reflects off the Mediterranean, as it did 2,000 years ago. The streets are crowded, the markets alive. Yet if you close your eyes, you can almost hear the ghosts of scholars moving through the colonnades. Papyrus rustles in the wind, faint and fragile. A philosopher debates the motion of the planets. A mathematician sketches diagrams in sand. Somewhere, a poet recites words that were never recorded elsewhere. It is a quiet sound, almost imperceptible, but it exists. Proof that human curiosity cannot be extinguished. Some historians say the library was doomed the moment it was imagined. Its ambition made it a target. Its vastness made it fragile. Others say it burned because knowledge always challenges power. But maybe, just maybe, the fire that destroyed the library also carried its ideas into the world, scattering them like sparks to ignite future minds. And so, as night falls, as you sit in your room listening to this story, remember this: the library is not lost. It lives in you, in your questions, in your desire to know, to explore, to imagine. Every time you read, every time you learn, every time you wonder about the stars or the nature of the universe, you are walking in the footsteps of Alexandria's scholars. The fire in the mind of the ancient world is still burning. It never truly went out. Take a deep breath, close your eyes, Picture the colonnades, the fountains, the soft sea breeze carrying the sound of distant voices. Imagine a young scribe, candle flickering, carefully copying a scroll, unaware that centuries later, someone will remember him. Imagine Eratosthenes measuring the shadow in Syene, Herophilus dissecting a human arm, Callimachus cataloging the words of the world. All of them, in their quiet brilliance, remind us of something essential, that knowledge is fragile. Yes, but it is also eternal, passed from mind to mind, century to century, fire to fire. And maybe, in that sense, the library was never truly lost. Because every time we reach for understanding, every time we teach, every time we learn, we reignite its flame. So tonight, as you turn off the lights, listen to the quiet. Think of Alexandria. Think of the Mausian. Think of the scholars walking silently among marble halls. And remember, curiosity is immortal. Knowledge is eternal. And the human spirit, once it has glimpsed the infinite, can never forget. When we think of the Library of Alexandria, we often imagine a single, catastrophic event, fire consuming thousands of scrolls, an instant disappearance of human knowledge. But history, like memory, is rarely so simple. The story of the library is not only about what was destroyed, but also about what survived. Fragments, whispers, and echoes scattered across the ancient world. Imagine a scholar in 5th century Constantinople. He is hunched over a dim candle, copying texts that traveled hundreds of miles from Alexandria. Some came through the Mediterranean trade routes, others through the careful hands of merchants who recognized their value. They carry the works of Euclid, Ptolemy, and Galen. Sometimes the margins are smudged. Sometimes a line is lost forever. But in that dim light, the flame of Alexandria continues to burn. It is a small flame, fragile, easily snuffed out. A single misstep, a flood, a careless hand, a foreign invasion can erase centuries of effort. Yet human beings, remarkably, have always tried to preserve it. Some of the library's scrolls found their way east into the bustling cities of the Islamic Golden Age. Baghdad, in the 9th century, became a new Alexandria in miniature. Scholars from Persia, Arabia, and beyond gathered in the House of Wisdom, translating Greek texts into Arabic, annotating them, expanding upon them. Here, Eratosthenes' calculations, Euclid's geometries, and Galen's medical treatises survived. Through these scholars, the wisdom of the ancient world made a detour across centuries and continents. By preserving fragments, copying meticulously, and teaching tirelessly, they ensured that the fire of human knowledge would not be extinguished entirely. Even today, when we study algebra, astronomy, or medicine, we are following a trail that runs directly back to Alexandria, a line of light stretching across a millennium. Meanwhile, in Europe, where the collapse of the Western Roman Empire left chaos in its wake, knowledge survived in monasteries. Monks, painstakingly copying manuscripts by candlelight, became the unlikely guardians of ancient wisdom. Imagine a monk in a remote scriptorium in the 8th century, carefully transcribing a Greek treatise on astronomy into Latin. Perhaps he does not understand every word, but he knows it is precious. Centuries earlier, that text may have been stored in the great halls of the Mausian, guarded by librarians who dreamed of cataloging the world. Now, far from Alexandria, it is preserved in silence, a bridge across time. It is a quiet heroism. No crowds, no marble columns, no lighthouses. Just devotion, patience, and care. And yet, for every scroll preserved, countless others vanished forever. We will never read the lost works of Sappho's later poems, of Callimachus' full catalogue of the world, of countless histories, scientific observations, and mathematical proofs. Entire fields of human thought disappeared in the ash and dust. We can try to imagine what they might have contained. A formula for understanding planetary motion before Copernicus. Medical knowledge lost that could have saved thousands of lives. philosophical debates on ethics, governance, and the cosmos, forever silenced. The magnitude of loss is staggering. The library was not merely a repository of texts. It was a map of the human mind, a mirror of curiosity, ambition, and intellect. Its destruction reminds us of the fragility of memory and the responsibility inherent in preserving knowledge. And yet, despite loss, the library's spirit endured. Its fragments became the seeds of future civilizations. Renaissance scholars, fueled by rediscovered Greek and Roman texts, reignited the flame of human curiosity. Figures like Leonardo da Vinci, Galileo, and Kepler owe part of their genius to the whispers that survived from Alexandria. The library, though gone, continues to teach us something profound, that knowledge is never fully lost, only transformed. Every text copied, every idea transmitted, every insight shared is a continuation of that ancient dream. Even now, when a scientist publishes a paper, a teacher shares a lesson, or a student discovers something new, the echo of Alexandria lives on. Proof that human curiosity is an unstoppable force. By the late 4th and early 5th centuries, Alexandria's golden age was fading. The grandeur of the Ptolemies was gone. The fires of war and faith had reshaped the city. The Mausoleum, the Serapeum, and the great libraries were shadows of their former selves. Marble halls were now occupied by new rulers, new gods, and new political powers. And yet, amid this shifting world, there remained a spark of brilliance. A small group of philosophers, mathematicians, and astronomers kept the flame alive. And among them, one name shines brighter than the rest: Hypatia. Imagine walking through the streets of 5th century Alexandria. The harbor is crowded with ships from every corner of the Mediterranean. The market hums with traders, but the air carries a tension, religious and political. Christians are now the dominant faith, and the old pagan ways are slowly disappearing. In the midst of it all, Hypatia walks with calm authority. She is a mathematician, philosopher, and teacher, renowned for her wisdom. Students from all over the Mediterranean come to learn from her. They sit on the marble steps of her lecture hall, copying her diagrams, absorbing her logic, fascinated not only by her intellect, but by the courage it represents in a world growing increasingly hostile to free thought. Hypatia's lessons are not just about numbers or philosophy. They are about observation, reason, and the power of inquiry. She teaches that the universe can be understood through logic and mathematics, that the stars move in patterns that humans can decipher. That knowledge is not a threat, but a tool to improve life and the mind. To her students, she is more than a teacher. She is a living connection to the vanished world of the Library of Alexandria. Through her, the spirit of Eratosthenes, Euclid, and Callimachus continues to walk the streets of the city. But Alexandria is no longer safe. Political factions vie for control. Local governors, Christian bishops, and remaining pagan elites all jockey for power. Hypatia, devoted solely to learning, becomes entangled in this dangerous web. The Bishop Cyril of Alexandria wields immense influence over the city's population. Tensions between him and the governor, Orestes, escalate. The city is rife with riots, with mobs taking the law into their own hands. And in this charged atmosphere, Hypatia's independence, her pagan associations, and her refusal to bow to political or religious authority make her a target. On a fateful day in 415 AD, a mob seizes her. The details are horrifying. She is dragged through the streets, stripped of her dignity, and killed by a crowd enraged not just by religion or politics, but by fear of knowledge itself. Her death is symbolic. It marks the tragic end of Alexandria's long line of philosophers. The last guardian of the city's intellectual flame is extinguished. Yet, Hypatia's story is not one of despair alone. Her life reminds us that knowledge, curiosity, and courage are inseparable. She stands as a bridge between the lost glory of the library and the future of human inquiry. Her students carried her teachings to distant lands. Her example inspired generations to question, to reason, and to value the pursuit of truth over submission to power. Historians argue about what exactly was lost with her death: texts, ideas, methods of reasoning. But the true loss is harder to quantify. It is the warning that civilization's most precious treasures are fragile, not because they are delicate, but because they are precious. Even after Hypatia, fragments of Alexandria's legacy survived. Greek texts were copied in monasteries and Islamic centers of learning. The principles of geometry, astronomy, and medicine continued to influence the world. Hypatia herself became a symbol of intellectual courage, immortalized in the writings of later scholars and philosophers. Imagine for a moment the candlelit hall where she taught. Each student leaves carrying not only a scroll or a diagram, but also the mindset she embodied: curiosity, courage, and devotion to understanding. That mindset spread silently across continents and centuries, long after the marble columns have crumbled and the fires have cooled. The library may have been gone, but through Hypatia and countless others, its spirit continued to flicker, quiet, tenacious, and eternal. The Library of Alexandria was gone, yet it refused to disappear from the human imagination. As centuries passed, the city and its fabled halls became the canvas for stories, legends, and almost mystical tales. People whispered about a place that held the sum of all human knowledge, not just mathematics, astronomy, medicine, and philosophy, but secrets, prophecies, and forbidden knowledge that could change the world. Even in its absence, the library loomed large in the collective consciousness. It became less a building and more an idea, the ultimate repository of human curiosity, the pinnacle of intellect, a symbol of both human aspiration and vulnerability. Historians and storytellers alike have debated what truly happened to Alexandria's scrolls. Ancient accounts vary wildly. Did Julius Caesar's fire destroy the library in a single night? Or did the Serapeon's daughter library survive centuries, only to be gradually eroded by politics, neglect, and religious conflict? The uncertainty gave rise to stories, some tragic, some romantic, some almost supernatural. By the Middle Ages, tales of lost scrolls inspired scholars and adventurers alike. Many imagined secret rooms hidden beneath the sands, vaults buried under crumbled temples, or hidden chambers containing scrolls that revealed the answers to life's greatest mysteries. The library became the Atlantis of human knowledge, lost, unreachable, yet infinitely compelling. Writers and philosophers pondered its fate, not just as history, but as a cautionary tale. During the Renaissance, the legends of Alexandria gained a new life. Scholars like Pico della Mirandola and Giordano Bruno imagined themselves as spiritual heirs of the library, seekers of lost wisdom. They believed that if humanity could rediscover Alexandria's knowledge, its texts, its ideas, its scientific principles, it could reclaim a kind of intellectual immortality. Artists painted it as a place of soaring marble halls, endless corridors of light, and scholars walking in serene contemplation. Poets wrote about scrolls that contained secrets of the stars, cures for disease, and lost philosophies that could unite humankind. The library became a metaphor, the eternal dream of knowing everything, of achieving the impossible through thought alone. Over time, the library's story became intertwined with myth. Some claimed it housed works on alchemy, the philosopher's stone, and forgotten magic. Others imagined that it held maps to the heavens or instructions for building machines that predated modern science by millennia. These myths persist even today. Authors, filmmakers, and game designers continue to use Alexandria as a symbol of ultimate knowledge. It represents both the height of human achievement and the fragility of our creations. It is the promise of understanding, shadowed by the danger of forgetting. Why does Alexandria captivate us so? Perhaps because it mirrors the human condition. It shows us what we are capable of when ambition, intellect, and curiosity combine. But it also reminds us how fragile those achievements are, how war, neglect, and indifference can erase centuries of effort. The myths are not lies, they are reflections. They preserve the library's spirit, even when its walls have crumbled. Every whispered story, every painting, every novel, every documentary is a continuation of its flame. When you read about lost knowledge, when you imagine scholars walking through sunlit halls, when you consider the fragile threads of civilization, you are participating in the library as enduring story. Legends of Alexandria teach us more than history ever could. They remind us to cherish knowledge, to preserve it carefully, and to recognize its value. They urge us to pursue curiosity boldly, knowing that fire, literal or metaphorical, can destroy, but that ideas, once set free, can travel further than any army. And perhaps most importantly, these stories remind us that the library was never just a place. It was an ambition. It was hope. It was humanity's audacity to believe that understanding the world fully and completely was possible. Even in myth, that dream survives. And so, when we think of Alexandria, we do not merely mourn its loss. We celebrate its spirit, which lives on in every mind that seeks to know. The Library of Alexandria is gone. Its halls, once alive with the hum of voices and the rustle of papyrus, have been reduced to dust and shadow. Yet its story, its memory, persists, echoing across the centuries. We often think of Alexandria as a cautionary tale, a symbol of loss, fragility, and human error. But there is another way to see it, as a mirror, reflecting both the vulnerabilities and the triumphs of civilization. Consider this. Every scroll destroyed in Alexandria was more than paper. Each contained the thoughts, observations, and wisdom of countless minds. Every formula, every line of poetry, every record of a star's movement was a piece of collective memory. The loss of the library reminds us that human knowledge is fragile. We may build monuments, create archives, and digitize texts, but memory is never guaranteed. Civilizations rise and fall, wars rage, fires burn, regimes collapse. Even today, digital storage, the modern equivalent of papyrus, is vulnerable to decay, corruption, and neglect. Alexandria teaches us that knowledge is not permanent unless we actively preserve it. Memory requires guardians, and civilization depends on their vigilance. And yet, for all its fragility, human knowledge has an extraordinary resilience. Even in the ashes of Alexandria, ideas survived. Scholars carried texts across continents. Fragments traveled east and west, inspiring new generations. The concept of a heliocentric solar system, the principles of geometry, the foundations of medicine, all these ideas eventually resurfaced, finding new life in different contexts. Knowledge adapts. It is not confined to a single place, a single building, or a single generation. In this sense, Alexandria did not truly disappear. Its flame continues, transformed and scattered, but still burning. Every mathematician, philosopher, and scientist who followed in the footsteps of its scholars became a custodian of that fire. Reflect on this. What makes a civilization enduring? It is not wealth, not military power, not even architecture. These can be destroyed or forgotten. What endures are ideas, the intellectual and cultural achievements that shape how humans think, govern, and understand the world. Alexandria's lesson is both simple and profound. A civilization that neglects its knowledge, that does not value curiosity and inquiry, risks losing itself. Every library burned, every text lost, every mind silenced is a blow not just to history, but to the future. And yet, hope exists in the persistence of memory. Knowledge travels in unexpected ways. Manuscripts hidden in monasteries, translations in foreign lands, oral traditions, all these preserve fragments of the past. Human curiosity is a river that flows, finding new paths even when blocked. Today, we live in an era of unprecedented access to information. The internet, digital archives, and global communication channels resemble a modern Mausian, a repository of knowledge accessible to billions. And yet, Alexandria's story warns us that no system is infallible. Digital decay, cyber attacks, misinformation, and the sheer overload of information threaten the clarity and accuracy of knowledge. Without care, even the most advanced civilizations can lose what they hold most dear. The difference is that we now know the stakes. Alexandria's memory teaches us vigilance. Preserve knowledge, share it responsibly, question critically, and remember that the fragility of human memory is a constant companion. There is a strange beauty in Alexandria's loss. It reminds us that human civilization is impermanent, yet ideas are semi-immortal. The library was destroyed not by the limits of human intelligence, but by the imperfections of human society. War, politics, fear, and ambition. And in that tension lies a lesson about our own lives. We are all temporary custodians of the world's knowledge. Each time we read, write, teach, or discover, we contribute to a chain that stretches back to the Mausian. Each act of curiosity keeps the flame alive. We are, in a sense, living libraries, vessels of memory, carrying forward the wisdom and folly of the past. And as long as humans seek to understand, to question, to imagine, the fire of Alexandria continues to flicker in us all. The Library of Alexandria is gone. Its marble columns have crumbled, its lamps extinguished, and its scrolls reduced to ash. And yet, somehow, it is still alive. Not in buildings, not in archives, not in any single place, but in us. In the curiosity that drives us to learn, the courage that drives us to question, and the audacity that drives us to imagine. Today, we live in our own version of Alexandria. The internet is a vast repository, a global Mausian where knowledge flows through wires instead of scrolls, where ideas traverse continents in milliseconds. Entire libraries fit in our pockets. We can access centuries of human thought without leaving our chairs. But there is a shadow in this brilliance. The very tools that make knowledge abundant also make it vulnerable. Digital storage can fail, misinformation spreads, and the sheer speed of information can overwhelm our ability to understand. The fragility that destroyed Alexandria still exists, only the form has changed. And so, Alexandria challenges us still. It asks, how will we steward the knowledge of our era? How will we preserve it, not just for ourselves, but for generations to come? The spirit of Alexandria lies not in its scrolls, but in its people, the scholars, scribes, and thinkers who sought understanding for its own sake. That same spirit can be found today in anyone who dares to question, to explore, to study deeply. Consider the scientists mapping the human genome, the astronomers charting distant galaxies, the historians uncovering lost civilizations. Each is a modern Hypatia, a custodian of the flame. Each is proving that knowledge cannot be extinguished so long as there are minds willing to seek it. Even in moments of societal chaos, curiosity persists. Ideas survive in unexpected ways, shared, copied, translated, and adapted. Human creativity, it seems, is impervious to the centuries. Alexandria's lesson is clear. Ideas endure when nurtured, and they perish when ignored. There is another lesson in Alexandria's story, the value of vigilance. Knowledge is fragile, not because it is inherently weak, but because it is precious. Every generation inherits the task of protecting and expanding it. We are the guardians of our own library. Every time we teach, read, discuss, and explore, we honor the scholars who walked the colonnades 2,000 years ago. Every time we write, record, or code, we contribute to the chain that connects us to the past. And the stakes are real. Consider how quickly civilizations can change, how easily knowledge can be lost in war, disaster, or neglect. Alexandria reminds us that preservation is not passive. It requires intention, dedication, and courage. Yet for all its fragility, Alexandria's flame endures. Even in ruins, it inspired the House of Wisdom in Baghdad, the monasteries of medieval Europe, the Renaissance thinkers who rediscovered Greek and Roman texts, and the scientists and philosophers who followed. Every time a new idea is born, every time a question is asked, every time curiosity prevails over ignorance, the library's fire flickers anew. It is not the buildings, the scrolls, or the marble columns that matter most. It is the human spirit behind them. Knowledge exists wherever curiosity exists. And as long as humans wonder about the world, Alexandria lives. Tonight, as you sit listening to this story, pause for a moment. Imagine the sun over Alexandria, the ships in the harbor, the philosophers walking through the Melsion, the rustle of papyrus. Picture Hypatia teaching, the scribes copying, the minds alive with questions about the stars, the human body, and the nature of existence. Now, look around your own world. Your computer, your notebook, your bookshelf. They are vessels of memory. You are, in a way, a librarian of the modern age, responsible for ideas that may one day shape generations yet to come. And perhaps that is the true lesson of Alexandria. The library may be gone, but the fire it kindled in the human mind cannot be extinguished. It lives in each of us, in our questions, our discoveries, and our relentless desire to understand. So carry it forward. Read, question, teach, explore. Seek out what others have forgotten, and imagine what can still be discovered. Every new idea, every act of learning, is a spark from Alexandria. Remember, knowledge is fragile, but it is also eternal. The Library of Alexandria is not merely a story of loss. It is a story of hope, resilience, and the power of human curiosity. The flame that once illuminated the ancient world continues to shine, not in marble halls, not in scrolls, but in the minds of those who dare to wonder. And if you, tonight, take even a moment to think, to question, to dream, then Alexandria is alive again in you.